Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. We're studying the descendants of the Vatsara descendants and all the generational kings, and especially we studied about Anga Maharaj, who was a very nice king, but then he had a son Vena, who was greatly sinful. And I also mentioned at the end yesterday that Anga Maharaj was married to the daughter of that's personified. So therefore, that union caused a birth of somebody like King Vena. And we stopped at so these are Maharaj descendants, and we stopped here somewhere at Anga Maharaj was very disappointed with Vena's bad character, and then he left his home and kingdom and retired to the forest. The great sages killed Vena with a curse as powerful as a thunderbolt. Right? We studied that how from that dead body of Vena, they churned out, and Prithu Maharaj came out, who was actually the partial incarnation of Krishna. So Vidura is continuing asking. Vidura said, "My dear Brahmin, King Anga was very saintly, gentle, of high character, and a lover of spiritual culture. How did a great soul beget a son like Vena?" Right? We all had that question. How can somebody so pious get somebody so sinful? Because of whom he abandoned his kingdom. I'm also surprised that the great sages, who were all fully conversant with religious principles, punished Vena. After all, normally it is the king who punishes others. Citizens should never insult the king, even if he appears sometimes to be sinful. Indeed, he is supposed to be the Lord's representative above all other rulers. Great sage, you are well acquainted with all subjects, both past and future. Since I am your faithful follower, please describe King Vena's history. And then, smilingly, Maitreya began to speak. Okay, so we stopped there. So all these questions in Vidura's mind. Vidura is a very loyal, just rule follower, wisdom. He was full of wisdom, who always knew what's the right thing to do. So he has these questions such as, how can a king be punished? We hear often, don't criticize senior devotees, don't criticize leaders. So Vidura is like, yeah, it's a basic principle. How is this happening? Obviously, general. Somebody likes to continue from the melodious sound.
The melodious sound of Sanskrit mantras reverberated throughout the sacrificial arena. Smoke billowed up as the priests poured ladles of ghee into the fire. Swaha, they cried as the offerings were made. The chief priest's brow furrowed. The ritual was almost over. Where were the gods? He whispered to his assistant. I cannot detect the Deva's presence. Can you? His assistant shook his head. The chief priest turned to the king on his other side. Great king, we are properly making offerings into the sacred fire, but the gods are not coming. Anga frowned, unable to speak due to his vow of silence. For the sacrifice, he merely looked physically at the priest. The head priest said, Oh, saintly king, there is no fault with the offerings or with the sacrifice. We know you have arranged everything with the great faith and care. We are properly chanting the Vedic hymns. All the priests assisting with this sacrifice are experts in ritual performance. Anga's worried eyes flitted back and forth. The head priest conferred with his assistants. He turned to Anga and shrugged. Dear king, we cannot think of any reason why the gods should feel insulted or neglected. Everything is being conducted properly. We cannot understand why the gods will not accept the offerings. By hand signals, Anga requested permission from the priest to break his vow of silence. The head priest consented, and the king began to speak. My dear great sages, kindly tell me what offense I have committed that, although invited, the gods are neither taking part in the sacrifice nor accepting their shares. The Brahmins conferred, and then the chief priest said, Dear king, we do not see any sin committed by you in this lifetime, nor even in your mind. However, in your past life, you committed sins which have resulted in your being without a son in this life. Anga sat down in a daze. No son? That's what was a calamity. Without an heir, he would be deficient in fulfilling his duties to his ancestors and to his citizens. There would be no one to perform his last rites. Seeing his distressed condition, the priests once again conversed. Finally, after several minutes, the chief priest said, "Oh, great king, we wish all good fortune for you. Kindly listen to our advice. Execute the sacrifice solely for the pleasure of Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Person. If you satisfy him, then he will certainly reciprocate, because Vishnu is the supreme enjoyer of sacrifice. When he accepts your invitation, then all the gods will also come with him and take their shares. Your desire for a son will then be fulfilled. Dear king, it is always fruitful to directly worship Lord Vishnu, for he quickly responds to those who seek his shelter." Anga's face lit up. "Please proceed immediately." The priests took their places and began offering oblations while chanting hymns for the pleasure of Vishnu, addressing him as the Supersoul in everyone's heart. As soon as the oblations were offered, an effulgent person appeared from the fire. He wore a golden garland and was dressed in white. He carried a golden pot filled with rice boiled in milk. After receiving permission from the head priest, Anga accepted the pot, and in great delight he respected the sacred food by sniffing its aroma. He turned and glanced at his beautiful wife, Sunitha. She was begotten by Death himself. Was it befitting that she partake of his sanctified food? Sunitha looked expectantly at her husband. He smiled and offered her the pot. How could he deny her a son? Soon after, Sunitha became pregnant, and in due course our son named Veena was born. Anga arranged for him to be schooled by Brahmins, but in his great concentration, Veena was inclined to act irreligiously, followed in the mood of his grandfather, Death. The boy developed a dark and sinister character. Excessively cruel and vindictive, he would take pleasure in the gratuitous killing of animals. Always angry, he stormed about the kingdom, and when anyone saw him, they would hide, fearful that he would attack them for no reason. The merciless Vena even killed his own playmates without the least compunction. His father punished him with increasing severity, but the boy would never not be rectified. After one particularly unhappy incident, King Anga became desperate. Restless, he paced up and down, pondering what to do. People with no son were certainly fortunate. They must have worshipped Lord Vishnu in previous life, so they could be spared the unbearable suffering caused by a bad son. He destroys the family's reputation, causes arguments between his parents, and generally creates endless anxiety. No thoughtful person wants such a worthless son, who simply perpetuates one's future bondage in the material world. while simultaneously making one miserable in a here and now. The king spent most of the day in his temple praying for guidance. At, as night descended, his heart lightened. In many ways, a bad son was better than a good one. A man who has a good son becomes attached to his home and family. A bad son, however, creates such a hellish home that any intelligent man naturally becomes detached. That night he tossed and turned, unable to sleep. He glanced over at Sunita, who slept soundly next to him. What was the point of staying here? He was old. Better he retired. There was no pleasure left in ruling the kingdom or enjoying with his wife. Anga rose, wrapped a shawl around his shoulders, and slipped silently out of the palace, unseen by anyone, heading for the forest. The next day the king could not be found. His ministers questioned the queen. Had he told her where he was going? He shook his head. The ministers consulted learned Brahmins. Did they know anything? The Brahmins knew how disgusted Veena was with his family life. They suggested he might have renounced his kingdom and gone to the forest. When the citizens heard their king might have left them, they became greatly aggrieved. People formed search parties, penetrating deep into the forest. They were the king. They were
Sorry, they were
reluctant to.
intent on finding
They
king.
were reluctant to coronate here. He was old. Better he retired.
Sorry. This one, this is the sentence. They were
Yeah, this one.
intent
Better he
on.
retired. Yes. There was no pleasure left in ruling the kingdom or enjoying with
No,
his
no,
wife.
no. Mataji, here. This sentence, they were intent on finding the king from here.
Okay. The king and begging him to return. After several days of futile search, they returned to the kingdom. The chief minister and court priests summoned the greatest sages of the land. When they arrived, all the citizens went to the palace. Tearfully they offered obeisance to the sages and informed them of their inability to find the king anywhere. King Vena's arrogance.
Okay, we can pause there. Any comments? How how much suffering King Anga must have gone through, feeling so disappointed, so hurt, so disgusted, and he
And
had to. Hmm.
what a comparison they have given about the good son and a bad son. How
Hmm.
one gets detached from a bad son if you have
Hmm.
a bad son. Yes.
We can apply the son to any other relationship also, like husband, father. If we had like a very, like I have seen devotees or people who have like very parents who are very protective, like this, and the kids can become very entitled. My father will take care. I know somebody who just, my father will get me out of this situation. My father will pay for this. So if you have like a very kind, nice father, you may become entitled. Same thing we can say with husband. If the husband is very affectionate, very nice, instead of depending on the Lord, we may become dependent on the husband to make us feel good, etc. So this principle is applicable in many relationships. But in the mundane way, oh, so sad. This person doesn't have nice father or nice son or nice husband. But then spiritually, Krishna has his way to say, here, hello, I am here, I'm your eternal father. Hello, here I am, your eternal partner. Why you are depending on these mundane. So for spirituality, material distress is a good thing. It can be a good thing. It's not always a good thing, but it can be a good thing. Yeah. Rajesh Radhika Mataji, would you like to continue? Thank you, Rasastali Mataji.
Thank you.
Yes, Mataji. Chapter 14 In Vena's Arrogance. Vena defies the authority of the sage and Lord Vishnu and is killed by the sages. The leading sages of the world, headed by Prajapati Brigu, arrived at the king's palace. to discuss who would succeed Anga. The chief ministers were reluctant to coronate King Anga's son. He is a wicked, immoral man. The sages shook their heads. This will not do, one said. The king must elevate his citizens in spiritual realization. How is that possible if he is sinful himself? Just then the guards announced that certain prominent citizens were requesting permission to speak to the sages. Bring them in, said Brigu. 2 or 3 well-dressed men entered the room and bowed. Pray speak your mind, said Brigu. O holy ones, we speak protection. In the few days since King Anga's disappearance, many people have been attacked and plundered. Some citizens have complained of being robbed in broad daylight. Did you go to the police? Yes, sir, said one of the citizens. The apparent 1 or 2 men, but in the absence of a king, there is no one to judge them. Hence, the police released them again. Another man said, "No one feels safe anymore. Please remain here and re-establish law or order." When the man left, the sage again spoke among themselves. We certainly have the power to punish wrongdoers, said one, but it, but it does not befit renowned sages to administer a state. That is why Lord Brahma created the warrior class. Yes, said another, without a king, rogues will harass the people with impunity. Brigu turned to the chief minister. Pray call Queen Sunitha. With her permission, we will coronate her son Vena. All the ministers fell to their knees, their hands clasped. No, not Vena. Please find some other solution. The sage collectively overruled their objections. Our blind king is better than no king. Kindly bring the queen with her permission. We shall perform the coronation tomorrow. Words of Vena's installation quickly spread. Every criminal became terrified on hearing this news. If we are caught and taken before him, he will delight in cruelly torturing us. They fled to the mountains where they hid in caves like rats fleeing from a snake. After his coronation, Vena became extremely proud. When the chief priest invited him to attend the shrine of Vishnu's worship, Vena berated him. How do you to make such a request? Worship Vishnu. I shall have your tongue cut out for your insolation. My lord, said the priest, shrinking back, the kings in your line have always attended Vishnu's worship. Why should the king worship anyone? Fool, you not know that kings like me have all 8 mystic powers. If I so wish, I can become smaller than the smallest or the greater than the greatest. I can get anything I desire, bring anyone under my control, and create anything I wish, even another kingdom. What need do I have to worship Vishnu? Turning to the god, he ordered, throw this upstairs into the dungeon. When the priest was dragged away, Vena sat scrolling on his golden throne. How dare those arrogant Brahmins worship anyone but him? He called his chief minister, prepare the army and bring out my war chariot. Tomorrow I shall ride out on tour. The next day, Vena mounted his chariot like a elephant. He traversed the kingdom, making the sky and earth tremble wherever he went. In every village and town, he had great drums beaten, summoning the citizen. When they assembled in the main square with the Brahmins at their head, he glared at them as his herald proclaimed, "Listen well, as of today, on the order of the great King Vena, our honorable Lord and Savior, the priests of this land are forbidden to perform any sacrifice to Vishnu or the gods. No more offering are to be wasted in sacrificial fire. No wealth or grain may be given in charity. Everything in this kingdom belongs to the king and must be used solely for him." He also ventured into the forest and mountains where the renowned sage dwelt and ordered them to stop their sacrifice on pain of death. As his chariot rumbled away, the sages gathered together. "Did you hear how he threatened us with death if we continue to worship Lord Vishnu?" said one. "I had heard of this so-called king's atrocities, but now I see it with my own eyes," another added. "He must have threatened the Brahmins everywhere," said a third. "This is very serious," said yet another. "If sacrifice to Vishnu and the gods stop completely, the people face catastrophic shortage. Rain will not fall, and famine will soon follow. We must remove him from power immediately." Another said, "Do you not remember how much the people were disturbed by thieves? Without a king, criminals will again persecute the poor citizen. It was for this very reason that ignoring the ministers, Leah will stated Vena." The sage sat with downcast expression. One of them sighed. "The poor citizens are like ants trapped on a log, a place at both ends. They have nowhere to turn. Without a king, they will suffer." A younger sage stood up. "It is surely our duty to protect the people as best we can. Let us carefully consider the situation. Even though he was unqualified, we installed Vena because of a political crisis. But now we face an even bigger problem from the king himself. As long as he remains in power, the people will never be happy." The other sage murmured their agreement. One of them said, "We should have foreseen this. His mother, Sunita, is Death's daughter. A male child generally inherits his mother's nature. For this reason, Vena is by nature troublesome. He is supposed to protect the people, but instead has become their worst enemy. Supporting him is like feeding a snake with milk. He will only get worse." The other sages called out in arrogance. Some suggested they
Agreement.
immediately leave. Sorry?
In agreement.
Yeah, called out in agreement. Some suggested they immediately leave his kingdom. One of the senior sages stood up to speak. "My dear friends," he said, "he appointed Vena as king so that he might protect the citizen, but now he has become their greatest threat. Still, we should first try to pacify him with gentle words. If we do not endeavor to rectify him, then we ourselves may be tainted by his sinful reaction. We installed him despite knowing his evil nature. Let us now advise him for his good. If he refuses to listen to us, then we will join those who oppose him. By our spiritual power, we will burn him to ashes." The sages applauded loudly. The next day, a contingent of the sage arrived at King Svena's palace and were ushered into his audience hall. Concealing their anger, they spoke sweetly. "All glories to King Vena. May you live long and prosper." Vena looked down haughtily. from his raised thorn. What use is your blessing for me, who am the supreme ruler of the world? Have you come seeking some boon from me? Maybe you wish death at my you wish death at my hands, so you may attain liberation. He threw back his head and laughed. The sages mustered their patience and remained calm. Their leader said, "Dear king, we wish you well. Please hear us carefully, and by so doing, your life's duration, strength, opulence, and fame will all increase." Meena leaned forward. "Oh, do you have some magical elixir? Or perhaps you know of some hidden treasure?" The sage glanced at one another. Why were any limit to Vena's foolishness? Their leaders, their leaders said, "O king, those who live according to religious principle and who follow them by words, mind, body, and intelligence live free of misery in this world and ultimately achieve liberation. O great hero, for this reason, you should not obstruct the spiritual life of your citizen. If you, if on your order they give up their spiritual practice, you will certainly fall down from your opulent royal position. A king can legitimately tax his citizens if in return he protects them from disturbance by evil ministers and criminals. A pious monarch can thus enjoy himself in this world and the next." Vena's mouth fell open. Were these skinny old men telling him what to do? The chief sage observed Vena incredulously. Perhaps he did not understand the benefit of properly discharging his duty. The sage said, "A pious king should direct his citizens to worship Lord Vishnu by strictly observing their Varnashrama duties. O noble one, the Supreme Lord, the Super Soul and origin of the universe is pleased when the king ensures everyone worship him. Even the gods who rule the higher planets along with their citizens take great pleasure in worshipping Vishnu, knowing that when he is satisfied, anything can be achieved. My dear King, the Supreme Lord, along with the principal school, enjoy the result of all sacrifice conducted throughout the universe. He, he is the three Vedas, the proprietor of everything and the goal of all penance. Therefore, for your own prosperity, you should ensure that people perform sacrifice to please Vishnu. When the Brahmins are so engaged, the gods who are empowered by Vishnus are satisfied and they grant whatever you desire. However, if you stop sacrifice, you will displease the god." Mena's face darkened, his mouth twisting into a sneer. "You are?"
We can pause here for today.
I was thinking, Vinash Kale Vipreet Buddhi.
Exactly. Exactly. Vinash Kale Viprit Buddhi. I mean, it's like that, right? It doesn't overnight, somebody doesn't immediately become so foolish, so arrogant. Slowly, slowly, a little arrogance, you know how to get away with it. And then the next offense, and then you know how to get away like that. And then one day, suddenly, we become so blind, and then we just get taken over by this false idea of I can win against any.
Is it because this power and the siddhis he got, that's why he becomes so arrogant? Although when
Not
somebody,
Siddhi. He didn't have any Siddhis.
no, he was mentioning that I can become the smaller than the smallest and bigger than the biggest.
Oh, in that
And
sense.
yeah, and other thing, when somebody got the knowledge and everything, he's become like the tree with lot of fruits. It should
Mm,
be banned and it should be give, it should be
mm,
humble. But he becomes so arrogant that he doesn't think that that's what it's Vinashakale Vipreet Buddhi.
true, true. ओके, तो ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय।
जय